Have you ever wondered what happens when privilege meets unwavering dignity high above the clouds? Picture this: two brilliant twin sisters seated in first class, poised and unshakable, only to find themselves asked to give up their hard-earned seats for a passenger who believes her comfort outweighs their rights. What would you do if your very presence became someone's inconvenience? How far would you go to protect your worth when every polite refusal is met with condescension and thinly veiled prejudice, in a cabin humming with polite conversation and muffled anxieties? Selah and Zuri Baldwin refuse to be silenced or shuffled aside. They hold their ground with calm resolve, but their quiet strength masks a storm of history, pain, and unbreakable resolve. What unfolds next is more than a fight over seats. It is a reckoning that shakes an entire airline, reveals the cost of entitlement, and forces us all to ask who really owns the sky. If you're ready to witness a story of justice delivered at 35,000 feet, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe now so you won't miss a single moment as our story takes off. The air inside Majestic TransAir. Flight 407 was cool and crisp, a manufactured stillness that only existed 36,000 feet above ground. First class hummed quietly with the soft rustle of magazines, a distant chime from the galley, and the occasional clink of ice settling into crystal tumblers. It was the kind of silence money bought one that was polite, curated, and undisturbed. In seats 1A and 1B, the Baldwin sisters sat, buckled in, headphones off, present. Selah Baldwin, the older twin by 9 minutes, gazed out the oval window, watching the final wash of ground lights disappear beneath clouds. Her face reflected back at her in the glass, a sharp jaw softened by contemplation, skin like polished onyx under the cabin glow. She wore no makeup, just moisturizer and calm. Her fingers rested gently on her laptop, closed but ready, beside her. Zuri leaned back in her seat, scrolling through a shared agenda on her phone. She had always been the restless one, her energy coiled like a spring even in the most luxurious settings. Today she wore her hair in a thick braid wrapped into a crown at the back of her head, gold thread woven subtly throughout. She looked like royalty. She acted like legacy. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of ascent. They rarely needed to. Years of shared bedrooms, dreams, and startup sprints had taught them the music of silence between them. And in that quiet, both were thinking the same thing: we made it. Verity had been a two-woman idea sketched out on a college napkin, a dream born from too many ignored voices and too few second chances. An AI platform designed to audit and expose equity gaps in corporations. Verity was now the quiet giant behind 3 Fortune 100 internal audits. Their code had teeth, and their mission had wings. This flight to Geneva was more than a speaking engagement. It was their arrival. They were keynote speakers at the Global Ethics and Tech Summit. 40 countries, hundreds of journalists, and they were opening night. "You think we'll see snow when we land?" Zuri asked, finally breaking the silence. Selah smiled, still watching the clouds. "Maybe. I brought your coat anyway." Zuri turned to her, one eyebrow raised. "You brought my coat. You would have forgotten it. I never forget things. You forgot your passport last month." Zuri rolled her eyes, but laughed, the tension lifting like cabin pressure equalizing. They sipped sparkling water from tall glasses, refusing the pre-dinner wine. They had work to finish, rehearsals to review, but first, they breathed. For once, they allowed themselves to exhale. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit glanced over, puzzled. He looked at them as if trying to place them celebrities' influencers. His gaze lingered a beat too long before he turned back to his tablet. Selah noticed. She always noticed, but she said nothing. They had been in first class before, but they had also been questioned about being there, mistaken for someone's assistant, offered menus they didn't ask for in patronizing tones. Once, Selah had been asked if she was lost on her way to coach. They had grown used to it, but they never stopped noticing. "Just imagine," Zuri whispered. 10 years ago, we were sitting on a Greyhound to sea, eating instant noodles." "Ah," Selah chuckled softly. "And now here we are, flying first class across the Atlantic," Zuri added, "with better snacks." They tapped screens, reclined slightly, and settled in. The flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, graceful as dancers in narrow aisles. Selah offered a small smile to one of them, a young woman named Elena. Elena smiled back warmly. She had taken their jackets with care, pronounced their names correctly, and treated them with the same attentiveness as anyone else. It shouldn't have been remarkable, but it was. Zuri leaned closer. "You think we can sleep on the flight?" "We should, but you won't." "You're right." Selah smirked. "I always am." The seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin lights dimmed. Conversation across first class resumed in low tones. Tax structures, real estate trends, destination weddings. There was a quiet, assured rhythm to it all, the unspoken confidence of people used to arriving before they were expected. And just when Selah closed her eyes for the first time, she felt the air shift. A presence, someone standing in the aisle beside them. She opened her eyes slowly. A woman, tall, middle-aged, in crisp ivory slacks and a salmon-colored cashmere cardigan, blonde bob, diamond studs, a handbag so monogrammed it practically shouted. The woman wasn't speaking to them. She was speaking around them. "Elena, I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but my husband is in seat 1B, and I'm in 8A. Is there any way I could sit with him?" Elena offered a polite nod. "I understand. Ms. Wickham. Unfortunately, those seats are already occupied." The woman looked down at Selah and Zuri for the first time. "Oh," she said. Perhaps they'd be willing to switch." Zuri blinked. Elena glanced at the sisters. Uncertain. "Let me check with them," she said. The woman smiled thinly. "I'm sure they won't mind." There was no insult in her tone, and yet it dripped with something else. Entitlement disguised as grace. Assumption wrapped in velvet. Selah felt her body stiffen. Zuri straightened in her seat. Elena turned to them, hesitant. "She's asking if you'd be willing to trade your seats so she can sit beside her husband." Zuri tilted her head. "To 8A? Yes. And her husband is?" Zuri asked, gesturing vaguely. The man across the aisle raised a hand and smiled awkwardly. Zuri looked at Selah. Selah didn't look angry. Not yet. Just tired. "No," Selah said gently. "We'd prefer to stay where we are." Elena nodded respectfully. "I'll let her know," Zuri whispered. "And so it begins." Selah didn't answer. She just stared at the window again. But this time, her reflection looked more awake, more ready. Something had shifted. The cabin hadn't changed. But the flight was about to. Marla Wickham did not sit back down. She lingered in the aisle, her perfectly manicured fingers resting lightly on the headrest of seat 1C. Her smile remained, polite and practiced, but her eyes told another story tight around the edges, calculating, as if she'd just realized something about the two women seated in front of her husband, and wasn't quite sure how to name it aloud. Selah and Zuri weren't looking at her anymore. They didn't need to. They could feel her there. Elena had already returned to the galley, offering Marla no further support, which meant Marla now had to navigate the conversation herself. "I understand," she said, her voice lilting with faux humility, "that it's a bit of an inconvenience to move mid-flight. But surely a row or two wouldn't make that much difference, would it?" Zuri turned her head slowly. "I'm sorry," she said evenly. "We're not moving." "Oh, no offense meant," Marla replied quickly, hand fluttering to her chest like a nervous tick. "Of course not. It's just that my husband, he doesn't do well with turbulence, and I'm always seated next to him. Always." She smiled again, tighter now, as though trying to charm her way past their no. Selah spoke this time. "Your request has been noted and respectfully declined." Marla blinked. Selah's voice was polite, gentle, even, but there was a finality to it that could have shut a door mid-sentence. Still, Marla didn't back down. "I just assumed," she said, louder now, "that since you're traveling together, and since you're not elderly or anything like that, you'd be more flexible." Zuri's head tilted ever so slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in the subtle recognition of a microaggression unmasked. "We are flexible," she said, "with people who don't assume." The words landed with the elegance of a well-aimed scalpel. Marla stood silent for a beat too long. That moment, the one where silence thickens into discomfort, stretched across the cabin like a drawn string. A few passengers peeked up from behind noise-canceling headphones. A businessman 2 rows back paused mid-sip of bourbon. A teenage girl peered over her seat, curious. Marla finally turned, her heels clicking softly on the carpeted aisle as she walked back to her seat in 8A. Her gait was stiff, controlled, like someone trying not to admit they'd been publicly refused. The quiet that followed wasn't quite peaceful. Selah inhaled slowly through her nose, then let it out. She didn't look at her sister. "I knew it wouldn't end there," Zuri whispered. Selah nodded. "She's the kind who doesn't believe no belongs to her." 10 minutes passed. The flight attendants returned to distribute the pre-dinner service. Trays appeared with herbed almonds and slices of manchego. A choice of wine was offered again. Zuri took a red. Selah asked for sparkling water. Both declined the warm rolls. But something had shifted in the cabin. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitcomb remained silent. He hadn't spoken during the exchange, hadn't even acknowledged the refusal. He read something on his tablet, expression neutral, face turned slightly away. It was a strange detachment, Selah thought, the kind that either came from denial or complicity. She didn't care which. The peace lasted only until the arrival of Grant Lacey. He emerged from the forward crew area, clipboard in hand, pressed Navy uniform pristine. Grant was the lead service manager for the flight. Tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a practiced smile. He crouched slightly beside Selah's seat, his voice smooth and low. "Good evening. Miss Baldwin. Miss Baldwin. I understand there was a minor seating situation earlier, and I wanted to personally check in." Selah looked at him. "We're fine. Thank you." Grant nodded. "Excellent. That's what we like to hear. However, Mrs. Whitcomb in 8A is, well, she's quite distressed about not being able to sit beside her husband. She's a long-time elite member, very familiar to our staff, and this flight is part of her anniversary trip." Zuri's jaw clenched. "We're on a work trip," she said. "Also booked months in advance." "Of course. Absolutely," Grant replied quickly. "We respect that." He hesitated, then added, "It would be a huge favor to us if you'd consider switching. And of course, We're happy to offer travel vouchers for the inconvenience. Selah leaned forward. How much of an inconvenience do you think it is to be asked to surrender a seat you earned? Grant blinked. I only meant I know what you meant, Selah interrupted gently. But here's what I mean. We paid for these seats. We booked them intentionally. We have work to do on this flight. And frankly, being asked a second time to move for the comfort of someone else who clearly assumed our seats were negotiable, it feels less like hospitality and more like hierarchy. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Grant glanced over his shoulder. A few passengers were watching openly now. Zuri took a sip of her wine. I'd like to make something very clear, she said, locking eyes with Grant. This isn't about seats. This is about what people assume we're entitled to. Or not entitled to. I understand, Grant said quickly. Of course. I'll let her know. He stood, smile faltering, and retreated down the aisle. A full minute passed. Then, from 8A, a voice rang out. Not a shout, but loud enough for the cabin to hear. Some people always think everything's about race. Zuri set her glass down. Selah turned her head, but neither spoke. They didn't need to. Marla's words hung in the air like turbulence that hadn't hit yet. 2 rows behind, a man cleared his throat. From across the aisle, someone exhaled hard, then silence again. It didn't last. 10 minutes later, Grant returned, this time standing just beside 1C, but not crouching. Miss Baldwin, he said, I do apologize for the continued discomfort. Mrs. Whitcomb has filed a formal complaint with in-flight management. She believes she's being treated unfairly. She feels discriminated against. Zuri laughed. Just once, sharp and soft at the same time. She feels discriminated against, yes, Grant said, clearly uncomfortable. For not getting seats she didn't book, Selah said flatly. He hesitated. Zuri reached for her phone. Selah stopped her. Wait. Zuri met her sister's eyes. She's making a scene, Selah said, voice low. Let her finish the performance. The final act is coming. Grant cleared his throat. We are doing everything to ensure all our guests feel respected. Selah turned back toward the window. Grant stood there for another moment, then slowly walked away. Behind them, Marla whispered to her husband again. Her tone was sharper now, more clipped, as though indignation was giving way to strategy, like she was calculating her next move. Zuri opened her phone again. No, Selah said. This time she nodded. I'm not calling him. Selah's lips pressed together. She didn't say who him was. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked ahead, jaw steady. I'm giving them one more chance to get it right. But if they don't, Selah looked back at her sister, her eyes unwavering. Then we let them hear what legacy sounds like. The cabin lights dimmed again. Dinner was served, but nobody was really hungry anymore. The cabin air was different now, heavier, like pressure before a storm. Not loud, but dense with what hadn't been said yet. Selah sat still, spine straight, arms resting on the armrests of 1A like a queen holding court. She wasn't angry, not visibly. Her face remained calm, composed, and watchful. But beneath that surface, the stillness was the kind that came just before something cracked. Zuri leaned forward slightly in her seat, phone in hand but screen dark. Her fingers tapped against the edge, not out of nervousness, but in measured anticipation. She was coiled energy, quieted by timing. Across the aisle, Marla Whitcomb sat perched in 8A with the posture of someone still expecting to win. Her husband remained beside her, pretending to read, lips tight, eyes unmoving. Selah stared ahead. She thought about how often this happened. Not the blatant insults, not the shouting, the quiet corrections, the silent erasures, the things asked of them that were never asked of anyone else. Would you mind moving? Could you just make space? You understand, right? And every time, they were expected to be the bigger person, the more composed one, the teacher in the room, patiently educating people who didn't want to learn. It wasn't just tiring, it was theft, a slow draining of peace. The flight attendant Elena returned. She brought dessert this time, 2 ramekins of creme brulee, slightly warm, with brittle sugar crusts. Elena smiled, eyes flicking from one sister to the other. There was sympathy in her gaze, but also caution. I just wanted to say, I admire how you're handling this, she said quietly. Zuri gave a small nod, not unkind. Selah just said, thank you. They took one bite each, and then came the voice again. This time, it was Marla, louder than before. I just don't understand how anyone could be so unwilling to compromise. Selah didn't look at her. Neither did Zuri, but their silence only fueled her. I mean, this is first class. We're all supposed to be civilized, generous. That's part of what separates us, isn't it? A sharp chuckle broke from Zuri's lips. Did you hear that she asked her sister, not turning her head? I heard it, Selah replied, still not moving. She said generosity is what separates us. Selah smiled softly. She meant privilege. Zuri shook her head slowly. No, she meant hierarchy. She just dressed it up in polite words. Grant Lacey returned, standing now with more stiffness. Whatever report Marla had filed with in-flight management, it had made its way back to him. He cleared his throat. I'd like to speak with both of you again, he said. We're seated, Selah replied, and not planning to move. Of course, but I just want to ensure this matter doesn't escalate any further. Zuri raised an eyebrow. Escalate? Who's escalating? We said no. Twice. Quietly. I understand. And to be clear, no one is forcing anything. But if there's any way to reach a resolution... Selah turned to him for the first time. Her voice was low, calm, like a whisper that carried weight. You keep asking us to solve a problem we didn't create. Grant hesitated. Mrs. Whitcomb is a high-tier client, a very visible one. She has connections within the airline. Selah cut in, not with volume, but clarity. She made assumptions about who belonged in these seats. She questioned our right to be here. Then, when corrected, she didn't apologize. She doubled down. And now, instead of addressing her behavior, you're here again, asking us to move. Her words hung there. No embellishment, no rage, just facts, delivered like stone. Zuri leaned in. And let me guess. Next comes the voucher. Grant's face twitched, a gesture of goodwill. We're not interested in goodwill. We're interested in boundaries. Selah replied. Grant didn't have a follow-up. He nodded once and stepped back, turning toward the front galley, shoulders tighter than before. Selah looked out the window again, but this time she wasn't seeing clouds. She was remembering. Their first ever flight economy class, knees pressed against hard plastic, sharing a pack of trail mix. She'd been 15. Zuri had been crying because their mother hadn't been allowed to board with a carry-on bag that other passengers clearly had. No explanation, no apologies, just an officer's shrug. Back then, Selah didn't have the words for what it was, but now she did. She whispered them softly. Pattern recognition. Zuri glanced over. What nothing? Another 20 minutes passed. Then the captain's voice came over the speakers. Cool. Professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Geneva in about an hour. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are fastened when instructed. Local weather is a brisk 2 degrees Celsius, with light snow expected. Selah let the words wash over her. An hour more, just 60 minutes, but it felt longer, because Marla wasn't done. She stood again, walked forward, stopped just short of their row. I really didn't want to say this, she began, and instantly Selah knew she absolutely did want to say it. But I can't help but notice the dynamic here. Zuri sighed. Here we go. Marla gestured vaguely between them. It just seems orchestrated. Like maybe this was designed to create drama. Publicity, even. Selah turned. That stopped Marla cold. We're not influencers, Selah said. We're not interested in drama. Then what are you? Zuri's voice was calm now. Even amused. Professionals. With names. With a booked itinerary. And with very little patience left. Marla scoffed. I'm not saying you didn't buy these tickets. I'm just saying maybe you're being used as a narrative. A beat. Selah blinked. And then she smiled. Not the soft smile from before. A different one. Colder. Sadder. We've heard this before, she said. And let me tell you, there's nothing flattering about being reduced to someone else's idea of a symbol. Marla flushed. You just expected us to give up our seats, Zuri said. Because you asked nicely. Because you assumed we'd feel guilty if we didn't. Because you think sitting beside your husband for a few hours is worth more than our autonomy. And when we didn't comply, you tried to make us feel like we were making a scene. Selah's voice was velvet, quiet and powerful. You made the scene. Marla opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked back to her seat. For good, this time. Grant passed her a few minutes later without stopping. He didn't even look at the sisters. Selah and Zuri didn't speak again for a while. They leaned back, closed their eyes, not in rest, but in self-preservation. The hardest part of being dignified, Selah thought, wasn't the silence. It was the restraint. And restraint, she knew, was the quietest form of strength there was. The moment the cabin lights dimmed for the pre-landing prep, something else dimmed with it. Patience. Selah could feel it. A shift, almost imperceptible, like the temperature rising a single degree at a time. And like all slow burns, it was dangerous because it made people think nothing was changing. Until the spark. Zuri sat upright, legs crossed, arms folded, her jaw tight. She hadn't said a word in 20 minutes, and that silence was its own kind of announcement. Selah, ever the internal architect, was watching everything: the glances, the whispers, the sudden interest from passengers who earlier hadn't cared who sat in which seat. People could sense tension like animals before a storm. They didn't need the facts. They could smell it in the air. And then came the spark. Marla Whitcomb didn't just walk this time. She stood deliberately, made eye contact with the flight attendant Elena, and raised her voice just enough to turn heads. I'm sorry, but I have to speak to the captain. This is a matter of customer discrimination. Elena's face froze mid-expression. She looked from Marla to the Baldwin sisters and back again. Mrs. Whitcomb, she said, her voice low. I can pass along any message you have. But the captain is in the final stages of descent preparation. He cannot leave the flight deck. Marla scoffed. I know protocol. I'm not asking him to make me tea. I'm informing him that I've been harassed by 2 passengers in first class and that I've been denied my right to sit beside my husband because of some unspoken racial sensitivity nonsense. Selah blinked. There it was. The gloves were off. And suddenly, the whisper turned into a wave. People turned in their seats, some subtly, some not. Someone in 2D removed their earbuds. A man in 1C, a tech consultant, by the look of his LinkedIn-branded hoodie, raised his eyebrows. One woman began typing furiously on her phone, thumbs moving like wildfire. Zuri stood. Elena instinctively stepped between her and Marla. Selah didn't move. Zuri's voice was like steel pulled through velvet. You just accused us of harassment. In public. On record? I stated my experience, Marla replied. Chin raised? No, Zuri said, stepping to the side, so the aisle was open. You fabricated a narrative to cover your entitlement. That's not experience. That's manipulation. Elena gently touched Zuri's arm. Miss Baldwin, please, take your seat. I'll handle this. Zuri's eyes were locked on Marla. No, Elena. She doesn't get to cry wolf and walk away. Elena looked torn. She wasn't used to handling this kind of conflict. Her training had prepared her for spilled coffee, air sickness, and crying toddlers. Not this. Selah finally spoke. From her seat. Marla, you don't know who we are. You don't know our names, what we do, or why we're here. But somehow, you've decided that your version of comfort, your husband's mild turbulence anxiety, is more valuable than our dignity. She paused. You don't know us, but we know you. We've met you 100 times, in 100 different forms. I've done nothing wrong, Marla said. I asked a question. You made a demand, Zuri corrected, then disguised it as civility. And when we didn't obey, Selah continued, you accused us of being part of some racial quota initiative. You used phrases like some people and sensitive and publicity like they were currency, and now you're trying to involve the captain. Selah stood now too, not aggressive, not challenging, just tall. We're not going to let you twist this. Elena looked at both of them. Zuri said, we're not making this into a spectacle, but we are correcting the record. There was a chime from the overhead speakers. Elena's crew phone buzzed at her hip. She answered, voice low. A moment passed. Then she turned to them. The captain has been informed. He has requested that the lead flight manager, Mr. Lacey, return to first class. And just like that, Grant Lacey was back. Same uniform, same smile. But this time, his expression wasn't smooth. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of something that was no longer small or dismissible. He looked at Selah, then at Zuri, then at Marla. And for a moment, he just breathed. I'd like to resolve this before we land, he said. Selah responded. That depends on what you think needs resolving. Marla jumped in. I've already explained everything. I've been made to feel marginalized, excluded, like I'm a villain for making a reasonable request. A reasonable request would have ended the moment it was denied. Zuri said, everything after that was you making us a target. I am not a racist, Marla snapped. I'm a mother, a wife, a loyal customer. Grant raised a hand. I need everyone to stop talking unless I ask you to. Zuri folded her arms. Marla's mouth clicked shut. Grant looked at Elena. Is there any video of the incident? She nodded. I'll submit the cabin footage to HQ after landing. He turned to the Baldwin sisters. I want to apologize. Truly. This situation was poorly handled. I should have shut it down earlier. Zuri's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you? Grant hesitated. I made a judgment call. I thought giving her a chance to feel heard would de-escalate it. You gave her a platform, Selah said quietly. At our expense. I understand that now. There was a beat of silence. Then Grant turned to Marla. Miss Whitcomb, per the captain's orders, I'm moving you to a temporary seat at the rear of the first-class cabin. This is to prevent further disruption. Upon landing, a team will debrief you, but you will not speak to the captain. You will not approach these passengers again. Marla gasped. You're punishing me. I'm enforcing policy and protecting the integrity of the cabin. He turned back to the Baldwin sisters. I will be following up personally with a written apology. From me and from the airline. He stepped aside to let Elena escort Marla back to 4D. Marla walked slowly, stiff and silent. She no longer looked powerful. She looked afraid not of danger, but of consequences. When she was gone, Zuri sat down again. Selah followed, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath for the last 30 minutes. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Zuri muttered, What just happened? Selah said, We said no. And this time, the world didn't look away. They didn't recline. They didn't eat the cheese plate offered in apology. They just sat there, eyes forward, hearts pounding like turbulence that finally arrived. It was quiet again, but this was a different kind of quiet. Not the cultivated hush of first class, but the silence that comes when something sacred has been disrupted. When every passenger knows they've witnessed something ugly, but no one wants to be the first to name it. Selah sat motionless, hands folded over her lap. Her breathing was even, eyes unfocused, but alert. She could still hear the echo of Marla's words bouncing in her ears. The accusation, the thinly veiled slur, the idea that her presence was theatrical, strategic, undeserved. Zuri was less still. She drummed her fingers against the armrest, then checked her phone. A message from their assistant popped up confirmation of their hotel transfer in Geneva. Another ping a reminder of their Tech Summit keynote in 22 hours. Zuri stared at the glowing screen, but didn't read it. She was thinking about restraint, and how exhausting it was to be graceful when you were being erased. She leaned slightly toward her sister. I want to call him, Zuri said softly. Selah didn't look at her. Not yet. She tried to weaponize her discomfort. Again. I know, and now we're the ones being told to sit still and wait. Selah nodded slowly. Exactly why we don't rush. Zuri closed her eyes, jaw tight. I hate how good we've gotten at this. Selah looked down at her hands. So do I. Another ping on Zuri's phone. This one from their father. Selah saw it over her shoulder. A simple message. Let me know when you land. Hope the flight's smooth. Geneva is chilly tonight. Proud of you both. Zuri stared at the text for a long moment. Then, without another word, she tapped his name and pressed call. Selah didn't stop her this time. The phone rang once, twice, a click, and then his voice came through. Calm, deep, the kind of voice that made people lower theirs. Zuri, sweetheart. Aren't you in the air? We are. Is everything all right? There was a pause. Selah reached over and pressed the speaker button. Zuri said, Not exactly. A quiet beat passed. Tell me. Selah spoke next. We've had a situation. Describe it. Selah and Zuri took turns. Calmly. Factually. No embellishment. Just the truth. Laid bare. The seat request. The refusals, the escalation, the accusations, the final insult. Their father didn't interrupt once. He listened. And then, finally, his voice dropped a shade deeper. "Marla Whitcomb, you said yes. Majestic TransAir, Flight 407, Zurich route correct, and the flight manager is Grant Lacey." He went quiet again. Then, his voice shifted. It was no longer the tone of a father. It was the voice of a boardroom. "Understood. I want you to do something for me." Zuri glanced at Selah, who gave a slight nod. "Put your phone on the tray table. Make sure it's facing upright, and leave it on speaker. I want to talk to your flight manager." Selah unbuckled her seatbelt and did exactly that. The phone sat between the sisters, a small rectangle that now held more power than anyone around them could guess. Zuri raised her hand slightly. Elena noticed. She approached with caution. "Could you please ask Mr. Lacey to come back to our row?" Elena blinked, surprised. "Yes, right away." Within 30 seconds, Grant was back, less composed this time, more careful, his uniform immaculate, but his forehead now lined with unease. "You wanted to speak with me." Zuri pointed to the phone. "My father would like to speak with you. He's on speaker." Grant blinked, confused, then leaned down slightly. "This is Grant Lacey, Flight Services Manager, Majestic TransAir." There was a pause. Then the voice responded. "Mr. Lacey, my name is Isaiah Baldwin. I'm the Principal Equity Chair of Baldwin Holdings. You might not be familiar with our firm, but you should be. 4 months ago, we acquired a 60% controlling stake in your airline through a silent buyout initiative. That makes me, for lack of a better term, your boss's boss's boss." The blood drained from Grant's face. Isaiah continued, "Now, I'm calling not as a shareholder, but as a father. The 2 women you've repeatedly pressured to move seats are Selah and Zuri Baldwin, my daughters, both co-founders of Verity Technologies, both booked first class months ago, both confirmed in seats 1A and 1B, yet for over an hour they've been asked, harassed, and guilted by one of your elite members to surrender their seats for her own comfort." Grant opened his mouth. "Don't speak yet." Isaiah's voice was razor-sharp now, cold, precise. "Instead, I want you to answer this. Why did it take a complaint from your elite member to trigger action, but not the word of 2 ticketed passengers? Why was comfort prioritized over dignity? Why was a known client allowed to make racial insinuations without immediate correction?" Grant was frozen. Isaiah's voice dropped lower. "Let me be even clearer. My daughters did not call me to escalate. They called me to protect themselves, because they have learned too often and too painfully that even with money, success, and influence, they are still expected to yield to entitlement draped in luxury." A pause. "This ends now. Mr. Lacey, you will do 3 things immediately. 1. You will remove Mrs. Whitcomb from the first-class cabin. Her ticket will be marked for review and her status suspended pending investigation. 2. You will provide Selah and Zuri with a written acknowledgement of mishandling and misconduct. 3. Upon landing, you will report directly to Majestic TransAir's corporate office for formal review under my leadership and that of the interim CEO I helped install last quarter." "Do you understand?" Grant's mouth opened, then closed. He finally whispered, "Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll be expecting updates." Then Isaiah's voice softened. "Girls, I'm sorry. You did exactly what you should have, with dignity, with control. I love you both. We love you too. Daddy." The call ended. The phone went dark, and first class sat in stunned, reverent silence. Grant Lacey stood frozen beside seat 1A. The phone call had ended, but the echo of Isaiah Baldwin's voice still vibrated in the air like the lingering hum of turbulence. Passengers weren't pretending anymore. Every single person in first class had heard the call. Most didn't know exactly who Isaiah Baldwin was, but they understood one thing: the balance of power had just shifted, and it hadn't shifted quietly. Grant swallowed hard. The veneer of corporate charm had cracked. He was no longer the composed face of customer service. He was a man called into accountability publicly, precisely, and in real time. Elena returned to the cabin, her eyes flicking from Zuri to Selah to Grant. He turned to her. "Please inform Mrs. Whitcomb that she's being relocated immediately. Escort her to 6C. She's not to speak with these passengers again." Elena blinked, but didn't hesitate. "Yes, Mr. Lacey." She moved down the aisle, walking with the quiet confidence of someone who had waited for a moment like this. A moment where integrity wasn't just permitted, it was required. Selah and Zuri remained seated, saying nothing, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitcomb stared ahead, his expression unreadable. His wife's drama had pulled him into a storm he didn't control, and his silence now had weight. Not neutrality, but complicity. A rustle of whispers moved through the cabin, like a ripple on still water. "Did you hear that?" Was that real? That was their dad. I think he owns part of the airline. None of it mattered now. The facts had been spoken out loud. The lie had collapsed under its own arrogance. All that was left were the consequences. Elena reappeared minutes later with Marla in tow. Marla walked stiffly, her lipstick slightly smeared, her eyes red, not from tears, but from fury. She looked around as she passed through first class, and for the first time, no one smiled at her. No one nodded. No one offered her a polite excuse. She passed Selah and Zuri without a glance. But Selah looked at her, not in anger, not even in satisfaction, just a clear, unflinching gaze that said without words, "You chose this." Elena gestured to seat 6C, a lone spot closer to business class. Marla sat down slowly. Her husband remained in 1B, unmoving. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Privilege had been separated from protection. Grant turned to the Baldwin sisters. "I want to formally apologize. Again. I should have listened the first time." Selah nodded once. "You still can," she said. Zuri didn't speak. She just reached down, unwrapped a set of noise-canceling headphones, and slid them over her ears. Not to shut the world out, but to signal she was done talking. For now. Grant stepped away, shrinking back into the galley like a man retreating from battle. The rest of first class tried to pretend they weren't affected, but they were. A woman in 2A leaned toward Selah and whispered, "I'm sorry. You handled that. With grace." Selah offered a small, weary smile. "It's not our first time." The woman nodded and sat back, ashamed of something she hadn't said out loud. Across the cabin, a younger man pulled out his phone. He wasn't filming, but he was searching. Isaiah Baldwin. The name populated in seconds. He scrolled. A financial analyst, an equity firm titan, a name tied to tech, to airline mergers, to social justice funding initiatives, and to Verity. He looked at Selah and Zuri again, and this time, not with confusion, with recognition. People always assume power wears a suit, that it walks with a certain stride, speaks in boardroom jargon, signs things with gold pens. They never assume power might wear sneakers, that it might sit quietly in seat 1A, sipping sparkling water, listening instead of talking. But now they saw it, clear as day. Selah looked out the window. The clouds were thinning now. Geneva's outline was just beginning to appear, mountains rising beneath them, soft and white. She thought about the little girls behind them, the ones in coach, the ones whose eyes she had met earlier at the gate. Did they see all of this? Would they remember it? Would they learn that strength could look like silence? Would they understand that justice didn't always roar, it sometimes whispered? Then rang louder than thunder. Zuri broke her silence. Do you think this changes anything? Selah tilted her head. For who? For them? Selah sighed, thoughtful. For some. Maybe. For others. It'll just confirm what they already think. That we're dangerous, that we're ungrateful, that we're trouble. Zuri nodded. So we keep smiling and letting them tell us we're overreacting. No, Selah said softly. We keep showing up. Fully. Without shrinking. Zuri leaned back. Sometimes I just want to scream. I know. Selah closed her eyes. But I also know that we don't always have to be the example. We don't owe anyone our composure. Not every time. A pause. But today, we chose that path. And they heard us. The cabin began its final descent. Seat belts clicked, trays locked. The captain came over the intercom. We're about 15 minutes from Geneva. On behalf of Majestic TransAir, thank you for choosing us. We hope your arrival is smooth and your stay inspiring. Zuri chuckled under her breath. Someone's getting a memo about this flight. Selah smirked. Oh, I'm sure someone already has. As the plane tilted downward and the mountains drew nearer, the sisters sat in quiet unity. Behind them, Marla Whitcomb sat alone. Her power didn't follow her. Her entitlement had evaporated. And as she looked at the back of seat 5C, her jaw clenched. Not because she had lost a seat, but because no one had come to rescue her. No manager had fought for her. No passenger had come to her defense. She had stepped into a game she thought she owned and learned that the board had shifted. This wasn't just about seats. It never was. It was about seeing. And now, everyone had... The plane glided smoothly through the descending layers of air. But inside the cabin, the turbulence had only just begun to settle. The announcement of descent had returned structure to the space. Seatbelts clicked back in, tray tables shut, and flight attendants moved quickly down the aisle, collecting glasses and leftover cheese trays. But the silence remained. It wasn't the kind that came with altitude. It was the kind that followed a reckoning. Selah glanced out the window, watching the ridges of the Alps rise slowly into view. The snow looked untouched, perfect from above. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to walk across that landscape. Quiet, wide open, honest. She blinked and returned to the present. Zuri had taken off her headphones. Her breathing had slowed, but her eyes still carried the storm. She wasn't angry anymore. She was tired in the way that comes not from physical effort, but from emotional labor, from carrying grace on your shoulders for far too long. Across the cabin, someone cleared their throat. It was subtle, but deliberate. Selah turned slightly. The man in 1C, the one in the branded hoodie, leaned forward. I just wanted to say, he began awkwardly, that was impressive. The way you handled all of it. Zuri gave a tight nod. Thanks. I work in corporate compliance, he added. I've seen a lot of things sweep under the rug. That wasn't one of them. Selah didn't smile, but she met his gaze. We weren't trying to impress anyone. I know, he said. That's what made it stick. He sat back. Moments later, the woman in 2A leaned over again. this time with more confidence. "I've flown a lot of years," she said, "and I've never seen a situation handled with that much composure. You two changed something today, whether the airline admits it or not." Zuri exhaled. "You'd be surprised how often nothing changes at all. But people saw it," the woman said. "That matters." More passengers were turning now. Heads nodded slightly. A few mouthed silent apologies. One man raised his eyebrows as if to say, "I didn't say anything, but I was watching." Selah felt a strange sensation in her chest. Not pride, not vindication, responsibility. Every time they were forced to confront this kind of thing in public, it became theater. And theater always came with an audience, and sometimes applause. But applause wasn't healing. It wasn't justice. It was just a sign that the crowd finally noticed. She leaned toward her sister. "I wish it didn't take a scene for people to see us." Zuri's voice was quiet. "I wish we didn't have to be the ones making it." In the front galley, Grant Lacey was on a call. His voice was hushed, but the urgency in his posture said enough. He held a tablet in one hand, flicking through what looked like internal documents, messages, maybe even instructions from higher-ups. Elena joined him briefly, nodding once, then glancing back at the Baldwin sisters. She didn't say anything, but her look carried weight, respect, regret, gratitude. Selah nodded at her. A message passed without a word. Back in row 6, Marla sat stiffly, arms folded, eyes glued to the seat back in front of her. Her husband hadn't moved from 1B. He didn't turn around to check on her. He didn't say a word. There was a crack between them now. A silence that wasn't just marital, it was structural. She had built her social standing on a certain kind of untouchability. Now, that illusion had been publicly pierced, and her husband wasn't shielding her anymore. Selah watched the way Marla sat, defensive, shrinking, a woman who had commanded so much space, now unable to hold her own. Zuri leaned sideways slightly, murmuring, "I wonder what she's thinking." "She's doing the math," Selah said, "trying to figure out what it's going to cost her. Her status, at the very least." Zuri let out a low breath. She was so sure. She's not anymore. A few rows behind Marla, a young woman in business class leaned forward as if to see her more clearly. Her phone was in her lap, a news app open. Selah caught a glimpse of the headline. "Airline Executive's Daughters Harassed on Flight CEO Responds Mid-Air." It had already begun. Someone had uploaded part of the call, just the audio, muffled, but unmistakable. Isaiah's voice, Grant's reply, the calm directive, the mention of controlling stake. Zuri leaned over to read the headline. How did that happen so fast someone recorded it? Zuri blinked. "You think it'll go viral?" Selah didn't answer. She already knew the answer. The descent grew steeper. Geneva loomed closer. The clouds began to thin, and the golden haze of morning broke through, casting everything in a pale, honeyed light. First class was lit up, not by luxury, but by aftermath. The cost of what had just happened was still unfolding. Behind the curtain, separating first from business, Elena stepped through once more. She moved to 6C, crouched beside Marla's seat, and handed her a folded piece of paper. Marla opened it, her eyes scanned the words, and her mouth pressed into a line so tight it disappeared. Zuri turned slightly. "What is it?" "Probably the suspension notice," Selah said. She didn't need to guess. She had seen that kind of letter before. Precise, unapologetic, legal. The announcement came again from the cockpit. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The lights dimmed. The flaps adjusted. The aircraft tilted forward. Selah looked out the window one last time before the clouds cleared completely. Geneva glittered below, small and cold and foreign. They were almost there, but she knew, deep down, that they had already arrived, not at the destination, but at the moment that would ripple far beyond this flight. Selah Baldwin had always been good at holding it in. Emotions, thoughts, hurtful words she could have said, but chose not to. Her whole life had been a quiet act of measured restraint. Even as a child, she'd been the calm one. When their mom was late picking them up from school and Zuri paced the sidewalk, Selah sat cross-legged and hummed to herself. When a teacher confused her with another black girl in class for the 4th time, Selah smiled and corrected them without flinching. She had learned early that her silence could be a shield, that in a world eager to paint her as angry or difficult, grace was a kind of rebellion. But now, as Flight 407 descended into the silver mist of a Swiss winter, that shield felt heavy. She stared out the window. The mountain stood still and ancient, immune to what happened in the cabin 35,000 feet above them. She envied them for that. Her heart beat a little faster now, not from fear, but from release. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation, the phone call, the silent stares, it was fading, and what remained was exhaustion. She didn't look at Zuri. She didn't need to. She could feel her sister's presence like a second pulse, the shared rhythm of survival. Zuri had always been the fire. Selah, the earth. They balanced each other. But sometimes, Selah wondered if she leaned too hard into steadiness, if her silence let too much pass, if the world mistook her dignity for agreement. She pressed a palm gently to her chest. Not dramatic, just grounding. The plane jolted slightly as it dropped altitude. Zuri didn't stir. She was scrolling through her phone now, probably checking if the story had spread. Selah didn't care about the story. She cared about what came after, about the little things. How many passengers on this flight would forget their names tomorrow? How many would tell the story wrong? How many would say, "There was a scene, but it got handled," without ever admitting what the real issue was? That was always the part that stung the most. Not the confrontation, but the rewriting. The way people sanded down the sharp edges so they didn't have to sit with their discomfort. Selah wasn't naive. She didn't think one flight would undo years of bias. She didn't expect policies to change overnight. But she had hoped for maybe just a moment that someone in that cabin would have spoken up before the phone call. That someone besides her and Zuri would have said, "This is wrong. You can't treat them like that. You can't ask black women to shrink just because it makes you more comfortable." But no one had, until power spoke. And then, suddenly, everything shifted. Selah clenched her jaw. Why did it always take money? Connections. A last name that meant something, why couldn't their no have been enough? She heard Zuri speak beside her. "It's already trending." Selah didn't respond. Zuri looked at her. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Selah." Selah turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Selah let the mask slip just a little. "I'm tired," she whispered. Zuri's expression softened instantly. "Me too." They sat in that shared space for a while, a space not of triumph, but of truth. Then Zuri added, "I know we did the right thing, but I hate that it had to be so loud for people to believe us." Selah nodded slowly. Every time we're visible, we become a story, a lesson, a symbol. And then we have to carry that, too. It's like we're not allowed to just be. The seatbelt sign dinged. The final approach had begun. Outside, the ground rose closer. the city slowly forming through breaks in the clouds. Geneva looked cold, elegant, indifferent. The flight attendants passed one last time, checking latches, straightening trays. Elena didn't speak, but her eyes lingered on the Baldwin sisters with something like apology, or admiration, or both. Selah took a deep breath. "I don't want this to define us," she said quietly. Zuri tilted her head. "It won't. It already has. We didn't choose this fight, but now it'll be part of our name, our headline, our identity in the public eye." Zuri offered a wry smile. "Maybe. Or maybe it's a beginning." "Of what?" "Of people realizing we're not here to play by their comfort rules." Selah considered that. She didn't know if she believed it, but she wanted to. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to feel everything she'd pushed down. The shock of being asked to move, the humiliation of being accused, the quiet fury of being disbelieved, the shame of needing her father to fix what never should have been broken, the guilt for feeling shame at all, and under it all, the steady thrum of something else, stillness, power that didn't need to yell, legacy that didn't need validation. She opened her eyes again. The runway came into view. Geneva was seconds away. She looked at Zuri, who was now sitting upright, hands on her knees like a sprinter waiting for the gun. Zuri glanced at her, smiled. "We land. We walk off this plane. We show up to that summit like nothing happened. And if someone brings it up," Zuri shrugged, "then we remind them we're here to build futures, not explain our existence." Selah smiled. A real one this time. The wheels hit the tarmac with a soft but undeniable thud. The cabin jolted, then slowed. The engines roared, then faded. They were down. But inside Selah, the storm hadn't passed. It had just moved, resettled, like weather always does, waiting for the next front, waiting for the next sky. The jet bridge was still attaching when Selah unbuckled her seatbelt. The final chime echoed overhead, and a robotic voice thanked passengers for flying Majestic TransAir. It sounded routine, almost bored, like it had no idea the weight of what had happened during the flight. Zuri stretched her arms forward slowly, working out the tension in her shoulders. She didn't say much, just looked at her sister, gave a subtle nod, and began gathering her things. Selah stood up, calm and precise. Every movement she made, even now, felt deliberate. As she reached for her coat, she caught a glimpse of Grant Lacey standing near the front galley. He was speaking quietly to a security officer who had just boarded. They weren't rushing. No one was being arrested, but it was clear that protocols had been triggered. A woman in 2C whispered, "That's them," as Selah and Zuri stepped into the aisle. "That's the Baldwin sisters." Someone else held up a phone. Not to film, just to capture a moment. A memento of proximity to something historic. Zuri looked down at the floor. Selah kept her eyes forward. The walk to the front felt longer than usual. It wasn't just a few steps, it was a gauntlet of stairs. Breath held behind raised eyebrows, minds racing to stitch together rumors with what they'd seen. Selah paused just short of the exit. She turned slightly, looked back. Marla Whitcomb remained seated in row 6, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her lips pressed together so hard they were losing color. She looked like she was waiting for someone to apologize, but no one was coming. Her husband had disembarked already. No eye contact, no words exchanged. The fracture between them now visible. Selah turned again. She and Zuri stepped out of the aircraft. The first thing they noticed was the flash. Not paparazzi, Just a journalist, maybe two, camped near the arrival gate with their phones, lenses up, ready to catch an image. Geneva wasn't Los Angeles or New York, but news had traveled fast. A leak, a retweet, a trending tag. It didn't take long anymore. Selah kept walking. She wasn't here to be anyone's headline. She was here to attend a conference, lead a panel, and deliver the keynote speech on ethical AI integration across global markets. But today, it seemed her existence had become the real story. Zuri leaned toward her as they passed immigration signage. "You think this is going to follow us into the Hotel Selah?" Didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Yes." Another flash. Someone murmured her name. "Miss Baldwin, can we ask?" "No," Zuri said firmly. They didn't stop. They didn't run. They moved like women who had learned that silence could be armor, that poise could be protest. Two airport security officers trailed them discreetly, not as a threat, but as quiet protection, a show of protocol, a reminder that their safety mattered now, if only because people were watching. Outside baggage claim. Their assistant Layla was waiting. She stood near the carousel, holding a tablet, scanning the crowd. When she saw them, her face lit up, then dropped quickly into concern. She rushed forward. "Oh my God! Are you both okay?" "We're fine," Selah said. Layla looked over their shoulders. "I've already had 6 press inquiries. Someone leaked the audio of the call. It's everywhere now." Zuri exhaled. "Of course it is," Layla continued. "Majestic TransAir just released a holding statement, very corporate. Says they're reviewing the incident and value diversity." Selah raised an eyebrow. "How brave of them." Layla pulled up a notification on her tablet. "Also, the summit organizers bumped your keynote slot up. You're now opening the conference. Tomorrow morning." Selah blinked. "They want us to start the entire event. Apparently, you're the headline now." Selah turned to Zuri. "You still want to do it?" Zuri looked at her for a long moment. Now more than ever, the carousel beeped. Their luggage slid down, black and sleek. Layla grabbed it and motioned toward the exit. "There's a private car waiting." As they stepped outside, Geneva's cold greeted them, sharp, crisp, dignified. The air smelled like snow and steel. Mountains loomed in the distance, and everything felt quieter than it had on the plane, but no less electric. Selah sat in the car first, letting the warmth of the leather seat melt into her coat. Zuri followed, then Layla, who immediately began scanning messages on her screen. "They've already scheduled an internal board meeting at Majestic HQ. Your father's flying in." Selah nodded. "He said he would." Zuri looked out the window as they pulled away from the terminal. A digital billboard flashed above the arrival zone. For a split second, it showed their names: Selah and Zuri Baldwin, founders of Verity, guests of honor, World Tech Summit. It wasn't about the airline. It was about their work. At least, it had been. Now, it was about both. Selah leaned her head back. Zuri broke the silence. "Do you think she'll sue Marla?" "Yeah." Selah considered it. "No, she's not that brave. She might go public." Selah shook her head. "She already did. And people saw who she really was." Zuri smiled faintly. "You think they'll believe us this time?" Selah looked at her. They already did. She wasn't just talking about the passengers. She was talking about the world. Because something had shifted. Not completely, not permanently, but undeniably. And no matter what spin the airline released, no matter what Marla claimed next, the truth had been seen, heard, recorded. This wasn't a story Selah or Zuri had asked to tell, but it was theirs now, and they were going to own it. The ballroom of the Palais des Congrès was a cathedral of glass and steel. Hundreds of chairs faced a wide stage lit by soft white panels. The logo of the World Tech Summit spun silently on a massive digital screen. Below it, two names flashed in gold: Selah Baldwin, Zuri Baldwin, co-founders, Verity Technologies. They were slated to open the summit. Originally, they were scheduled for a panel on ethics and artificial intelligence. But now, things had shifted. The organizers hadn't said it outright, but everyone knew they were here not just to speak, but to address. It had been 15 hours since Flight 407 landed, enough time for the story to catch fire. The audio clip had been viewed nearly 12 million times. The public statement from Majestic TransAir had been dissected, criticized, and hashtagged into oblivion. And Selah and Zuri had remained mostly quiet. Until now. Backstage, Layla checked her watch. 10 minutes. Zuri sat calmly, legs crossed, a tablet in her lap. She looked more focused than ever. Her hair was pulled back, her dark gray suit sharp but understated. Selah stood by the window. Geneva's skyline sparkled beyond the curtained glass. She could see the reflection of herself, of who she'd become in the last 24 hours. Still poised, still steady, but no longer quiet. She turned. "I don't want to open with the flight," she said. Zuri nodded. "Me either. But we can't ignore it." "No," Zuri said. "We just reframe it." Selah smiled. They both knew what that meant. Layla approached with two wireless microphones. "You ready?" They took them. And then the doors opened. The crowd hushed. Spotlight swept across the audience and landed gently on the two sisters as they stepped onto the stage. Selah walked first, not because she needed to, but because it was time. Zuri followed a breath behind. They reached center stage. Applause broke out, long, loud, weighted, not just for their work, not just for their company, but for their stance, their composure, their story. When the room settled, Selah spoke. "Good morning." Her voice was clear, calm, but filled with presence. "We're honored to be here with you today. When we first agreed to speak at this summit, our plan was simple: to talk about the intersection of ethical design and artificial intelligence, about how data can be used not just to predict, but to protect, to preserve fairness, not just efficiency." Zuri continued without missing a beat. "And that's still the heart of what we're here to share. But something happened yesterday. Something that reminded us why ethics and systems and fairness aren't just about algorithms. They're about people." The audience leaned in. Selah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Yesterday, we boarded a flight like any other, sat in seats we paid for, seats we had earned. And yet, our presence was treated like an anomaly. Our existence became a disruption. Our dignity was questioned until it was defended not by our words, but by our Father's title, by influence." Zuri stepped forward, and while the world applauded our calm, what you didn't see was the cost of that calm, the labor, the restraint, the generations of training it took to not scream, not lash out, not walk away. Selah paused, letting silence hold for a moment. People say the technology is neutral. The data doesn't discriminate. But the truth is, every system reflects the biases of the people who build it, just like every moment reflects the values of the people who live it. A screen behind them lit up with the Verity logo, a simple V enclosed in a circle of concentric lines. Data becoming clarity. Zuri turned slightly to the audience. "When we founded Verity, we didn't just want to disrupt the market. We wanted to rewire the narrative, to create tools that see people fully, not as data points, not as risks, not as anomalies, but as whole human beings. The audience was utterly silent. No phones out, no coughing, just listening. Selah continued, and we've learned painfully that visibility doesn't always come with safety, that even when you succeed, you're expected to explain yourself, justify your place. Zuri's voice softened. We're not here to relive the incident on that flight. We're here to repurpose it. Selah looked out over the audience, tech founders, policymakers, CEOs, students. What happened to us wasn't rare. It wasn't even surprising. But what came after the public accountability, the viral attention, the swift response that was rare. Zuri finished the thought. And we want to make sure it doesn't stay rare. They stood still for a moment. Then Selah turned back to the screen. A new image appeared. A photo, taken years ago. 2 little black girls sitting on the floor of a library, surrounded by books, one of them holding a globe, the other tracing lines on a map. That was us, Selah said. Dreaming big, dreaming global. Not knowing that one day, we'd need more than dreams to stay in the seat we earned. Zuri stepped closer to her sister. But now we're here, and we're not moving. A wave of applause began slow at first, then rising like a storm breaking against silence. It wasn't just appreciation. It was recognition. It was solidarity. It was a room full of people who finally saw. And maybe, just maybe, were ready to act differently because of it. As the applause rolled on, Selah turned to Zuri, and for the first time since the flight, her eyes glistened. Not with sadness, not with pain, but with something deeper, hope, and beneath it all, stillness. Not the kind born of silence, but of truth. While Selah and Zuri were backstage, receiving quiet congratulations from fellow speakers and summit organizers, the real storm was gathering on the other side of the Atlantic, at Majestic TransAir's North American headquarters in Atlanta. Every floor of the sleek glass tower was pulsing with unease. The internal memo had leaked. Subject: immediate action required. Passenger incident review. Within 3 hours of Selah and Zuri stepping off Flight 407, a meeting had been called, not just with legal and PR, with the board, and with Isaiah Baldwin himself. The conference room was silent as he entered. No need to introduce himself. No need to raise his voice. Everyone knew what time it was. Isaiah sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a tablet in front of him. He didn't check it. Didn't touch it. He just let the silence work. He looked around the room. Senior leadership, outside counsel, HR executives, the interim CEO, Judith Kane. She was the first to speak. Mr. Baldwin, we've reviewed the preliminary details. The video has over 18 million views. The audio's been picked up by 3 major networks. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in favor of your daughters. We're coordinating with crisis management to shape the response. Isaiah raised a hand. Judith stopped mid-sentence. This is not about shaping perception. It's about restoring principle. He let the words hang. Tell me, he said quietly, how many complaints have we received in the past 5 years alleging discrimination from our premier-tier clientele? A young legal analyst near the end of the table cleared his throat. That would be 137. Sir. Isaiah nodded once. And how many resulted in formal investigations? The analyst shifted. 12. And how many in actual disciplinary action? The room was silent. Finally, someone whispered, 2. Isaiah leaned back. I see. He tapped the tablet once. The screen came to life behind him, projecting an image, a bar graph showing complaint volume over time. Then another image, still frames from the plane's security footage. Marla Whitcomb, standing over Zuri. Finger pointed. The confrontation frozen in time. Then the transcript, line by line. Grant Lacey's hesitant tone, Selah's clear refusal. The moment the call came in, Isaiah looked up. I didn't want to be in this room today. He wasn't performing. He didn't need to. I didn't want my daughters to be the reason this company finally reckons with itself. I invested in Majestic because I believed it had the potential to be more than just another airline. Because I believed people deserved to move through the sky with dignity. He paused. But here we are. He turned to Judith. I want 4 things by end of day. She nodded, pen poised. 1. Grant Lacey is to be relieved of duty, effective immediately. He failed to protect passengers who were well within their rights. 2. The Whitcomb's elite memberships are to be suspended indefinitely. Any legal pushback will be met with our full legal response. We will not negotiate with entitlement. 3. A public apology, not a vague corporate statement, is to be issued written by the same team that drafted the Verity campaign 2 years ago. They know how to speak to people, not just to markets. Judith scribbled furiously. And 4, Isaiah said, voice soft. I want a full internal audit of all first-class incidents in the past 3 years. I want to know who was silenced, who was dismissed, and who was punished for merely existing in a seat they paid for. A long silence followed. Someone finally asked, and the shareholders? They'll thank us later, Isaiah said. People don't abandon airlines for mistakes. They abandon them for refusing to grow. He stood slowly. This isn't about my daughters. It's about every passenger who didn't have the name, or the reach, or the audience to be believed. Then he walked out, and the room stayed quiet long after the door closed. Meanwhile, a small news team had set up a live stream outside Majestic's HQ. Word had spread about the internal shakeup. A whistleblower in HR confirmed that changes were already happening. The phrase policy overhaul had made it into 3 morning news cycles. But it wasn't just about corporate procedures. It was about tone. People were tired of hearing companies take allegations seriously. They wanted to see someone actually take action. At the Geneva summit, Selah sat on a balcony overlooking the city. Her tablet buzzed softly beside her. A message from Layla. CEO of Majestic just stepped down. Effective immediately. Isaiah's leading the press call this evening. Zuri walked out, coffee in hand. News Selah passed her the tablet. Zuri read the message, then looked out across the city. Did you think it would happen that fast? No, Selah said. But maybe the world's finally realizing the PR can't replace principle. They sat in silence. Then Zuri said, I keep thinking about that little girl in the boarding area, the one who stared at us. Selah smiled, the one who had the same braids I used to have. Yeah, Zuri said. I wonder what her parents told her. I wonder what she thinks now. She probably thinks we're superheroes. Zuri laughed. God, I hope not. Why? Because superheroes never get tired. And I'm so tired. Selah laughed with her. It wasn't bitter. It was real. Then her phone vibrated. Another message. This one from their father. Call me when you're free. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Selah read it twice, then closed her eyes. For the first time in days, her body began to relax. Not because the work was over, but because something, somewhere, had finally shifted. And for once, it hadn't taken a whisper or a war. It had taken clarity. And now, the sky felt a little more honest. 3 weeks later, Selah sat in the window seat of another plane. watching the sunrise stain the clouds in lavender and gold. She wasn't flying first class. Not today. Not because she couldn't, but because sometimes you chose a quieter cabin when you needed to hear yourself think. She wore a soft gray hoodie, headphones around her neck, fingers wrapped around a warm paper cup of tea. Across the aisle, Zuri was curled against the window, eyes closed, earbuds in, her forehead lightly resting on the cool plastic. They had been on the road almost nonstop since the summit, not for press, not to talk about Flight 407, but to return to what mattered: building Verity, meeting with partners, sitting down with young black women in tech programs who wanted to ask not just about algorithms, but about how to move through rooms that weren't built for them. And every city they visited, someone mentioned the flight. A whisper in an elevator. A woman who handed them coffee with trembling hands. A hotel employee who waited until checkout to say, "My daughter watched your speech. She said she wants to lead one day, too." Selah didn't mind the mentions, not really, but she had started to feel the weight of the story. It was like being turned into a symbol before you could fully grieve the thing that made you one. She turned from the window, reached into her bag, and pulled out her journal. She flipped past pages of ideas, diagrams, plans for new app features. Then she found the page. The one she had started the day after they landed in Geneva. She had written only one sentence at the top. It was never just a seat. Below that, she had started a list, not of events, of emotions. What she had felt, moment by moment, when Marla Whitcomb stood over her, when Grant Lacey hesitated, when no one in first class said a word. She read them again now. Confusion, disbelief, shame, anger, stillness, and finally, resolve. That was the word that stuck. Not victory, not justice, just resolve. Because the truth was, justice wasn't a moment. It was emotion, ongoing, relentless, quiet and loud in equal measure. Zuri stirred in her seat and opened her eyes. "You journaling again?" Selah nodded. Zuri sat up, brushing sleep from her eyes. "You know what I keep thinking about? What that woman in seat 6C? I wonder if she tells the story differently now." Selah smiled faintly. "She probably tells people she was misunderstood." Zuri laughed. "Or that we were rude. Or that we overreacted." They both chuckled. "But the sound didn't reach all the way up," Selah said. "I used to worry so much about how we were perceived. Now I just want to be clear." Zuri leaned her head back. "You think it changed anything?" Really, Selah looked at her sister. "I think it changed us." Zuri considered that. Then she nodded. The flight attendants began moving down the aisle, preparing for descent. Selah packed away her journal, buckled her seatbelt, and sat back. Out the window. The city below was waking up. Another place, another panel, another project. But this time, they weren't entering rooms as people trying to prove they belonged. They were walking in as people who had stayed seated, not just physically, but spiritually, with conviction, with calm, with clarity. The captain came over the intercom. "We'll be landing shortly. We thank you again for choosing Majestic TransAir." Selah smiled softly. The irony wasn't lost on her. After all the headlines, the investigations, the firings and policy changes, they had chosen to fly Majestic again, not because they forgot, but because they believed in making systems better. From within, the flight touched down smoothly. As the cabin lights came on, a flight attendant approached them. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with coils pulled back into a neat bun and a look in her eye that said she knew exactly who they were. She leaned down, "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "Not everyone can do what you did, but a lot of us have been waiting for someone to—" Selah nodded. The flight attendant hesitated, then added, "There's a girl on this flight. Row 14, middle seat. She saw you both board. She hasn't stopped watching you since. I think she sees herself." Selah looked past the attendant, down the aisle, just for a moment. Their eyes met a girl, maybe 11, 12, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, braids tied with tiny gold cuffs, a Verity sticker on her laptop. Selah smiled, then unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Zuri followed. They didn't make a speech. They didn't announce themselves. They walked off the plane, just like anyone else. But as they passed row 14, Selah reached into her coat pocket and slipped something into the girl's hand, a small metal pin, shaped like the Verity logo. The girl stared down at it like it was a key. Maybe it was. Maybe that's all it took sometimes. Not grand gestures, just small signs that said you belong here. They walked down the jet bridge in silence. This time, no cameras waited, no press. Just the soft hum of another airport waking up. Selah turned to Zuri. "You ready?" Zuri grinned, always. And they stepped forward, not toward a podium, not toward applause, but toward what came next. Whatever that was, because the work wasn't finished, and the seat wasn't the destination. It was only the beginning. Thank you for joining us on this journey through dignity, resilience, and the power of standing firm against discrimination. Selah and Zuri Baldwin showed us that true strength can be quiet yet unyielding, and that one decisive stand can spark change from the cabin to the boardroom. If this story moved you, please give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit subscribe, so you'll be first to see our next inspiring tale. Together, we can amplify voices against injustice and celebrate the courage that transforms the world. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge what we think we know and remind us why respect is every person's right.